Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I will call this meeting of the Boise Public Works Commission to order, and I will start with a quick call of the roll. So when I'm here, when I call your name, please let me know that you're here. Commissioner Ellis.
Here.
Commissioner Crowley.
Here.
Commissioner Hilton. Commissioner Morgan.
Here.
Commissioner Collette. All right, looks like we have a quorum and we can jump in. The first item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from our last regular meeting on March 2nd, and I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Commissioner Crowley.
I would move that we approve the minutes. I believe we have two sets of minutes to approve. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, I would move that we approve the minutes for both meetings in March as distributed.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second it.
Motion and second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, the same sign? Hearing none, the motion carries. And we are on to our regular agenda items. Up first is a presentation on the 2022 water outlook, and I will turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. We just wanted to provide an overview of the water outlook for 2022. Most of you know we had a bad water year in 21. It's not looking much better for 22, at least not yet. So John Roldan, our Strategic Water Resources Manager, is going to give you an overview of the outlook and any steps the city's taking to address. So John.
Thanks, Steve. Oh, there it is. There, Commissioners, thanks for allowing me to be here to present on our water resource update and go over a few of our planned conservation measures. Like Steve said, I think we're in for an interesting year, so I'll dive right in. Maybe a little background on this year first. December and early January was a great time of year. we had a lot of snow falling, and we ended up in the first week of January at about 130% of average. But since then, the spigot dried up or turned off, and we've seen very dry conditions. February was the driest on record at the airport, and we got the third driest period from January to March. So we just found that out. So not too terribly great on the water side outlook, but that has dropped us. So again, from 130 coming into this year and in early January down to, if you can read on this, 63% snowpack, 63% of average snowpack in the Boise River drainage. I think I read this morning that might actually be at 61, but that's more current information. So as Steve had mentioned, last year was a challenging year as well. We got through it without too many scrapes and bruises, but it was a challenging year. So I thought it might be helpful if we kind of compared last year to what we're seeing this year at the same time, just to kind of give you a flavor of what we might be able to expect. So if you look over the left figure, the state of Idaho is the snow water equivalent for all the different basins. And if you look down around, if you can locate where the Boise River drainage is, down kind of on the lower left, we were at 91% of average last year at this time. That actually, we started to get drier after in April. So we had more of a wet winter, early spring, but we had a dry later spring. If you kind of go over to the right map, you can see we're already experiencing those dry conditions earlier. So that's not a good sign. We're about, well, if you go with the current forecast of 61%, we're about 30% lower in snow water equivalent or snowpack for this time of year. And that's near the April 1st average. Looking at our storage capacity at this time, if you can look at this is the Bureau of Reclamation's teacup diagram, adjusted a little bit just to focus on what I'm talking about today, the three upper reservoirs, Lucky Peak, Arrow Rock, and Anderson Ranch. You can see Arrow Rock's getting close to being full, but Lucky Peak's at about 50% and Anderson Ranch is about 40%. Last year at this time on April 1st, we were at 64% full, and this year we're at 55%. So we're coming in about 9% shy of last year. Not all bad news. These numbers are actually around average. The 64% is a little above average, and the 55 is about 92%, so just a little bit below average. But that it's hard to compare those, to look at that without thinking about flood control operations, because we haven't had any flood control operations this year. Sometimes when we do, they will drop the reservoir lower. So the point here is that last year was a difficult year, and we're 9% shorter in storage than last year. Switching over to the drought monitor. Again, the left is 2021 and the right is 2022. If you can zero in and find Ada County there on the bottom left of the figure of the state of Idaho, at this time last year, we weren't in drought conditions. And again, going back to what I said earlier, it started to get dry about this time. So it hadn't kicked in yet. If you go over to the right in 2022 and you find Ada County again, you can see we're already 2 steps ahead in the drought severity. So we're already at a moderate drought. And I think most folks can tell when they're going out in their yards, they can see their yards are dry, grass, turf is dry, and it's begging for water. The recent rain was a blessing and helped. We need a few more of those for sure. So kind of just to sum it up, looking at the April 1st snapshot, our snowpack's about 30% lower than it was last year. Our reservoir storage is about 10% lower than last year, and our drought conditions are more intense. Now, not to say we couldn't still get a wet late spring. I don't think it's not in the forecast at this point, but that could change. The cooler temperatures, I know the forecast is for average to cooler temperatures. So hopefully we don't get that record heat we had last year in June, where we were over 100 for most of the summer. So that will help. So it's not looking good, but we haven't lost all hope yet. And on the other side, on the brighter side, we do have a year of experience operating under these conditions. So there's a lot more continuity between agencies talking, and so that should go a lot smoother this year. But we're going to plan for it staying dry. So we want to talk about some conservation measures. Are there any questions at this point?
I'll open it up to the commission. Are there any questions for staff at this point? All right, hearing none, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I wanted to start with what we've been doing internally. The 20 Mile South Farm is our biggest water user, and irrigation is the biggest cost component of their operating budget. So we've spent a lot of time over the years trying to dial in our irrigation and make it as efficient as possible. So we calculate, or we use the Bureau of Reclamation's aggregate evapotranspiration numbers to determine what the plant needs are, and we strive to deliver exactly that. We also have, to do that, we have automated pivot systems that are programmed with those volume numbers in mind to actually deliver that amount of water. We have soil moisture probes that look to make sure that the water is staying in the root zone and we're not over irrigating. And then if we are, then we would back off. I'll draw your attention to this figure up in the upper left. That's a pivot circle. There's 2 pivot circles there. Actually, one is darker, and then one has, look, you can see some yellow, and that's a program that the farm has that looks at a pivot, takes aerial imagery, looks at that pivot area, and the yellow areas are where water is not being applied as effectively. So we can go in and know that our pivot nozzles they may be clogged, something might be a leak of some kind, and so we can go in there and make some fine-tune fixes. And as always, Ben Neidiger out at the farm, he's always interested in new technology and new software, so he's trying new things all the time. Our second biggest water user is the parks. And they do a lot of very similar things that are being done out at the farm. They're also on ET, demand-based irrigation. trying to deliver just what that plant needs, using soil moisture probes. There's a picture there on the bottom left of a weather station that they have out there to try and to help calculate those evapotranspiration numbers. They're also they're trying to remove all non-functional turf, which is, if you're not familiar with that term, it's turf that's not being used for sports fields or walking or some type of recreational activity. It's a good example would be like in this top left picture, a median. Having a bunch of turf out there is it's not being used. And so they're going through and actually replacing those medians in other areas where we have non-functional turf and putting in more drought tolerant landscaping. And in this case here in this upper left picture, some drip irrigation. They also have existing drought guidelines that have been around for quite a while that kind of dictate when surface water goes off, when the irrigators stop their water and folks will start to turn to groundwater to irrigate. They have set up some priorities on which parks will have highest priority. If you can imagine, medians get less priority and Morrison gets a lot more priority, so the big jewels get the highest priority and when the surface water turns off. And something, again, going back to lessons learned from last year, one thing we did in coordination with Veolia, we've got a couple folks here, we were coordinating when surface water turned off. We decided to coordinate with Veolia to say, we know our parks may need to go on some groundwater. We're going to try and deficit irrigate so we're not pulling too much from the ground and are using our potable supply. But if we do, then we're going to coordinate with you so we're not turning on at the same time as your other customers. So there's a few of these lessons learned. There's a lot of others, but things that will help us going into this next year. We're planning this year for during the summer, late spring, early summer, and then throughout the irrigation season to conduct an education and awareness campaign so folks understand what we're dealing with here. We're going to be monitoring the conditions. If they get worse, then we'll change our messaging. We're considering a voluntary water use reduction target as part of a kind of an attention getting method. Just if some folks respond better to a target, and so we're considering that, and then that target might get more aggressive as conditions if conditions worsen. But the big part of the awareness campaign will just be recommending indoor and outdoor conservation measures, best management practices similar to the ones we're using out at the farm and at our parks. Point folks to the Boise watershed, all the educational programs we have and information we can have online. And one thing that's a cool opportunity is we're going to encourage the use of smart meters that Veolia is already starting to install. They've actually got 40% of their area already covered with smart meters. And these meters allow you to, it's not almost real time, see what your water usage is. I think it's actually by day. It reports back by hour, but it aggregates that into the day. If you look at that little snapshot on the right, that's a kind of a user interface where you can see the green bars are the particular individual's water use, and you can actually compare it to the blue bars down there, what others are using. You can kind of see how you're doing and set targets for yourself. And this will be a great way for folks to kind of actually take those voluntary water use reductions and see how they're doing and compare. And we do have some folks from Veolia here as we're partnering on this education campaign. So I just wanted to acknowledge them. From a long-term perspective, as far for conservation, a few things. Zoning, we're in the middle of a zoning code, development code rewrite. So we're trying to get to introduce some landscaping, more drought tolerant landscaping requirements so we can cut down on our demand. We're going to try and fortify our surface water. We have an existing ordinance that requires surface water to be used on a property that's being developed that was farmed before and had irrigation water. That water needs to stay. We're going to try and strengthen that language a bit. So just things like that. We're also going to try and expand our municipal irrigation system and incorporate more laterals that are being neglected at this point, but that deliver this important surface water supply that the city has and keeps residents from having to turn to our potable supplies for an irrigation use, which is not a fit for purpose. And lastly, this is not on the conservation side. This would be on the supply side. We're trying to increase our water supply portfolio and diversify and kind of mitigate the risk of relying on any one water supply. Got another slide here on that. So this is kind of generally, I think I showed this to the commission in October, but it's just the portfolio that we're trying to build from existing water rights, existing natural flow rights, existing surface storage, which is really, we're trying to get more water from our irrigators that have these supplies. We have a recycled water program that's in its infancy and being developed. Groundwater recharge as part of that recycled water. And we're talking to irrigators about some exchanges for water supplies to take advantage of timing. And we have put a letter of interest in for the new storage capacity up at Anderson Ranch Dam. So that's all I have today. If there's any questions.
Thank you. I will open it up for questions from the commission. All right, well, seeing none, I look forward to seeing how the efforts and the work evolve. And thanks to our partners for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Chair Grott.
Yeah, thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Chair Trovat. Sorry, I just thought of something.
Commissioner Ellis.
I was gonna say, I don't have a question, but I wanted to comment on the first set of slides. So we kind of just saw a subset just recently, 2 or 3 slides. And the set before that, I was just saying, it was such a good visual to help with understanding the water levels, the snowpack and whatnot. All of that is just really helpful. It was really good slides, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yes, thank you. All right, up next on our agenda is a presentation on the fiscal year 2023 proposed budget, recommended rates, and the water renewal utility plan cost of service. I will turn it over to staff.
Chair Gravatt, thank you. And this is the culmination of multiple months of work with the commission. So I'm going to turn it over to Heather Buchanan, our Chief Administrative Officer, and she'll go over the combination of both our O&M costs, our capital costs that lead to the rate recommendation, and then how the cost of service integrates into that rate recommendation specifically for water renewal. So Heather.
I was like, choke. Thank you, Steve. So as Steve mentioned, this is one of the final presentations for our budget and cost of service study that we've been talking about since January. So appreciate the commission's patience with the continual presentations that we've had, but I'm excited to have kind of a culminating and presentation and asking for several motions from the commission this afternoon. So we'll dive right in. And a lot of the slides that I'm showing today are slides that you've seen over the last few months, but just a bit of a reminder of where we are with the budget and what you've seen, so that as you're making the final motions today, it's kind of a refresher, so you aren't thinking, what am I approving? So we'll just jump right in. So we've seen this slide multiple times. We're at the end of the arrow there. So that means we're asking for a motion today. We'll be talking about rates and cash flow projections, but also, as I mentioned, reviewing what we've talked about in the prior 3 months. So some of our overarching assumptions here, we'll go through these really quickly. We've talked about them before. For revenue, budgets that we're assuming account growth of 1% per year investment interest of only 0.5%. We are assuming that those will be conservative, and we may anticipate a little bit more growth or more revenue from the investment interest, but we feel it's better to be a little bit conservative than not and fall short of our revenue projections. For personnel costs, we are anticipating the usual rate increase or rate increases there, which would be 3% for our general labor costs, 4% for medical benefits, and then 2% for other benefit costs. And then the last item that's on the slide there is operation and maintenance general inflation, and we're using 1.15%. And as we talked about this previously, I'm sure people are like, well, you're kind of crazy. Inflation's way more than that. And we're trying to balance between being conservative and keeping our costs as low as possible, while also reflecting that we do need inflationary increases. We do go through our budget line by line. So this 1.15% is a starting point. As we review each account throughout our budget, we consider where there may need to be more, a larger increase for items considered like chemical or something like that, that is increasing substantially year over year, or when we might not need an increase at all, and we would reflect that as a 0%. So overall, when we look at our budgets, our total increase will be more than 1.15% for the operation and maintenance line items, but this was a starting point. So we'll quickly review through each of the different funds, and then at the end of each fund, we'll talk about the proposed rate increases, cash flow projections, and then impacts of rates on monthly budgets where applicable. So for the water renewal fund, then we've talked about the capital multiple times already. I won't review the projects in particular, but this is the list of projects and the proposed budget amounts for fiscal 2023. We have projects at Lander Street that are continuing the repair replacement work there, also meeting regulatory requirements and capacity improvements. West Boise is also regulatory and capacity driven with a few items for repair and maintenance. The new recycled water program is continuing. The collection system, we also have the large and small diameter rehab, as we usually do, along with miscellaneous extensions. And then there are other projects, the watershed exhibits project, which is moving that facility to the climate and water facility or education center that we're anticipating, and then the major repair and maintenance projects that we budget on an annual basis. So next, we mentioned this last time, just giving an idea of what's going on in our fund. There are, and this one slide summarizes a lot of work that's happening. We're implementing our capital improvement plan that was part of our water renewal utility plan. We are executing a staffing plan right now so that we're staffed appropriately to execute the work that's coming forward. A solids handling plan will be starting soon. We're talking right now about the financial plan. And next year in our budget, we're anticipating an energy plan and an asset management plan. And we're also really excited about the IPDS permit that will be issued this summer, anticipated either in June or July, which is a culmination of a ton of work from our environmental team. So then what does that look like for our budget? I don't expect you to look at every number on this slide. But the important points here, if we look at the total revenues, our total revenues for this fund are anticipated to be $73.5 million. And our total expenditure budget is about $64.8 million. So we're anticipating a net income of roughly $8.7 million. And that's intentional. That net income helps us fund the capital projects that are upcoming that we just talked about and some of that future work that we'll be doing. We also have resource requests, which are basically FTE requests that we've talked about previously. I won't go through the list of them again, but you can see the titles and a little bit of note about each one of them. There will be 11 positions that we're requesting and roughly $1 million of total budget associated with those. If all of those are approved, then that additional budget would be added to our operational budget for fiscal 2023. Our staffing needs don't stop, I guess, there. just as our capital planning needs do not stop there, when we are developing our FTE requests for fiscal 2023, staff from each of the divisions submitted requests to our director, and there were roughly 30 FTEs that were requested at that time. We whittled that list down to the 11 that were proposed. So that leaves us 19 or so that we're not moving forward right now, but those needs are still there. And as we move forward through the coming 10-year window, we anticipate that we will need to add additional FTEs. Some of the drivers that are listed here are reasons for that. So growth that's coming across the board. As we noted, we have regulatory permits, so compliance with those will cause additional workload. Flow and load increases that are anticipated within our materials management fund. There are, as we have growth, that workload also increases. Implementing our utility plan and being able to execute on that. We're also expecting to have business and process improvements that we need to take on, and then organizational development and change management. So those are all items that are considered as we move forward. And so as we move to next year, you will see additional FTEs that will be requested as well to help meet the needs that are noted there. Okay, so we talked about this briefly last month about our water renewal rate recommendations, and we've talked about the umbrella rate increase as we talked last year about the bond recommendations and getting that in place. So the umbrella rate increase for the utility would be a 9.9% increase for fiscal 2023. That is for an average rate for all users. When we overlaid the cost of service study on top of that rate increase, then we start looking at slightly different rates increases by category or by class. So for single family and multifamily residential, we're requesting a 7.5% rate increase. Unmonitored commercial, an 8.4% increase. Monitored commercial would be an average of about not quite 17%. And then within Eagle Sewer District, roughly 6.9%. The other two sewer districts, West Boise Sewer District and Garden City, would also be going up slightly more. Their rate increases are governed by contracts. So we'll be updating our contracts with them to reflect the differential in rate increase there. So then what does that mean for an average residential City of Boise customer? So currently an average residential monthly bill is roughly $40. A 7.5% rate increase on that would be just slightly over, a couple pennies over that with $3. So bringing that to the 2023 average monthly bill of roughly $43 and almost 50 cents. So comparable rates, this is, we update this every year. So from the lowest rate in the area, which right now is for West Boise Sewer District at $23, you can see the middle range of that. The blue bars are kind of locally, we're averaging, I think, the $37.50. The Boise current rate is shown on here, which is a $40.43. Our proposed rate is also shown on here of $43.47, just to give an idea of where we fall in that range. So we're a little bit on the upper end, but we know that the rates that are shown on this graph for the other municipalities or other sewer districts are their rates, current rates. We don't yet know what their proposed rates are going to be. So we anticipate that their rates will also be increasing this next year. We just don't know how much. So we expect the tide, so to speak, to rise for all of them in addition and be somewhat closer to where we are anticipating ours for next year. And then you can see the bars in green would be the regional comparisons for Spokane, Portland, and Seattle. So then our rate outlook, this is just looking forward for the next 10 years. You can see our fiscal 2023 is the 9.9%. And then looking out to 2032, we're estimating rates could drop down to 5%. The green line that goes across the graph would be the average residential bill going forward each year. So comparing that. So we'll be at, like I said, about that $43.50 in 2023. We anticipate to be close to $80 by 2032. So then trying to put things in context for my cash flow slide here, the capital seems a little out of order, but I just wanted to give a reminder of kind of that 10-year projection of the capital spending. So we anticipate that we'll be increasing in the 24, 25, 26 to around our peak of our capital spending, then dropping down slightly in the years following that. So when we look at our cash flow projection, I'll orient us on this slide a little bit. The blue line that looks like the ball bounces out there in the middle of it a little bit, that's our cash on hand or our fund balance. And then the dashed line that's going across is what our target fund balance would be to cover 180 days cash of, or 180 days of operational costs. So you would expect that we don't want that to be just our minimum. We have capital costs and other things to cover with our fund balance. So that's why our blue line shows higher than the dashed red line. But you can see between 2022 and 2024, we anticipate drawing our fund balance down as we're starting to utilize some of that built up fund balance towards our capital projects. And then in 2025, 26, out through 2029, that little those bump ups in those years would be where we're receiving funds from our bonds that we will be issuing. That bumps our cash flow up temporarily, and then we draw it down as we utilize that for the capital projects that we're spending on. So you can see we start kind of, if you average those out though, we start leveling out kind of in the next 10-year window as we're utilizing the cash more readily for the bonds that we are, or for the capital projects that we're paying for going forward. Oh, why is this going the wrong direction? There we go. So solid waste fund. So for fiscal 2023, budget drivers in this fund are really driven by the service that we provide to our customers. We've talked quite a bit over the last few years about the recycling commodity price volatility. And while it's stabilized somewhat, there's still quite a bit of volatility in the recycling market. After China stopped receiving most of our recyclable commodities probably 3 or 4 years ago, market has shifted more towards a United States or national use of our commodities. But those markets are emerging and not fully utilizing those commodities yet. So prices are still pretty volatile, but have stabilized a bit. For our services, we've added 10 electric trucks, or are adding within this year. So within fiscal 22, all 10 trucks will be on the road. And we are anticipating those costs for our fiscal 2023 budget. In fiscal 22, we also added, expanded our compost facility. So this 2023 budget is anticipating that expansion. So we start paying Republic for that expansion. And then also with the Republic Services contract last year with the crazy local market, the labor market, they were experiencing difficulties with keeping drivers, keeping mechanics and whatnot. So there were wage increases there related to providing service. So those wage increases are being reflected over into our 2023 budget as well. So we talked about long-term planning last time. We are anticipating embarking on the solid waste strategic plan, and in partnership with that, a cost of service study to make sure we're covering costs appropriately to the plan that's evolving. So that will be on coming up in this year and into next year. We do have a resource request, and this resource request is actually moving through the process right now in fiscal 22. We our hazardous household waste environmental coordinator position was vacated just a few months ago by an employee that had been here a long time, and she worked part-time doing a huge amount of work in that part-time employment. So as we're trying to go out and hire for a new replacement for that position, we realized that it's a very niche position and would be difficult to hire as only half FTE, plus the workload now is larger and it really needs to be a full FTE. So we're asking to add a half FTE. As I mentioned, we are doing that in fiscal 22, but we also need to reflect it into our fiscal 23 budget, and that's why we're noting it for approval. Our proposed budget for fiscal 2023, then the revenues are estimated to be just shy of $40 million. Our expenditure budget is anticipated to be slightly over $40 million at $40,800,000. So when you take the difference there, that results in a net deficit of roughly $860,000. So we obviously don't want to operate the fund in a negative situation. So we are proposing a rate increase for the utility of roughly 3%. So as I noted, the net income before the rate increase is roughly $863,000 short. The 3% rate increase would generate roughly $1.1 million. And so our net income after the rate increase would be roughly $275,000 for fiscal 2023. So the impact for a residential customer, again, that's the easiest comparison for us. An average bill currently in fiscal 2022 is $21.76. A 3% increase for our residential customer would be roughly 65 cents, which would bring that average monthly bill in 2023 to $22.41. And that is for trash, recycling, and compost service. So our cash flow projection for the solid waste fund, again, the dashed line across the graph shows what our minimum target balance is. And in this fund, it's assuming a 30-day cash on hand, which would provide for 1 month's operational reserve. So we would hope to be above that. And we are just slightly above that for fiscal 2023. After that rate increase, we're projecting to be right at $3.9 million. So rate comparables. So it's a little challenging when we're looking at solid waste to compare apples to apples, because the services that Boise provides are different than maybe the services that some of the neighboring cities provide. So we tried to make it as comparable as possible, but the gray bars for all the other cities are representing their trash and recycling service. And for Boise, it represents our trash, recycling, and compost service. I believe a couple of our neighboring cities, I think Eagle is starting a compost service that's by subscription. So that would be on top of the price that is noted here. And I believe maybe Garden City and Star are doing that as well. So comparably for the service that we're providing, we're pretty much in the middle of the pack. And so the first, it shows both rates, both the pre-rate increase and post-rate increase on the chart or on the graph for Boise. Oh, why is it going backwards? So then let's look at the combined monthly bill then for water renewal and solid waste. So the updated value for fiscal 2023 for water renewal would be $43.47. Solid waste would be $22.41, which would bring that monthly total to just shy of $66. So move on to geothermal fund. So we've noted last month, we talked a little bit about the geothermal strategic planning design sprint. That's wrapping up, and some of the recommendations from that will be coming out soon. We are requesting a geothermal project representative. This is one of the items that was discussed in that strategic planning design sprint. We have one person that is tasked with managing the geothermal system, and that is a full-time job. So working on expanding use or attracting new customers is not, there's not a lot of time for that to happen. So this representative would allow that to happen. The cost of it, we're asking the general fund to contribute to that cost because the geothermal fund is somewhat resource constrained. But when we look forward here at this chart, we did include that as part of the personnel expense. If the general fund does cover that, the personnel expense in the geothermal fund would be reduced to reflect that. So our total water sales revenue for geothermal fund is roughly $670,000 estimated for fiscal 2023. Our expenditure budget is estimated at just about $883,000, which does result in a deficit of about $213,000 for the fund. We are purposely in this fund using some of our fund balance, basically through our funded depreciation, so that we can make strategic repairs on the system. So that is intentional. We are not recommending a rate increase for fiscal 2023 at this time, although we did consider that as an option. So our geothermal cash flow projection, you can see as we move forward, it grows slightly over the years, but not substantially over time. So for fiscal 2023, you can see we are dipping down slightly because of that use of fund balance, and then slightly growing over the next few years. Then the Municipal Irrigation Fund. This is our smallest of our enterprise funds. The operating revenues are about $54,000, and our operating expenses are about $44,000. So it gives us a net income of roughly $10,000 each year. Rates are reviewed annually in January as set by state code. So John Gunderson will review those with the commission at that time. And last but not least is the general fund. Just a reminder of what's included in the general fund. We have our facility program management, which manages the maintenance of all of our general city facilities. Facility services and operations is the planning and construction side of the house for our general city facilities. Includes municipal lighting, climate action, air quality and energy, the water supply team, which John Roldan just gave you a presentation regarding, stormwater, and then drainage, hillside, and DIS. So capital recap for this fund, it's changed slightly because there's more work going on a couple of these projects. So the facility relocation and facility remodel projects, Rob Bosefield's team is in the middle of discussion with the mayor's office regarding those projects. So we changed the amount that we had originally included on the slide to just say under discussion, because the amount is going to change. So we'll keep you posted as we get a more firm number there. But otherwise, the projects are still the same list of projects and otherwise the same amounts. Long-term planning, we talked about these items as well. The climate action and energy future plans, they're in the implementation phase. Facility program management, that support facility plan that was on the prior slide, and the office work space planning, those are in either implementation phases or ongoing. Water resources, the One Water study, it's going to be a new study for this next fiscal year, and we are requesting funds for that from the general fund. We have streetlight and drainage and gulches asset management programs also that are ongoing. So there are two resource requests. One is an engineer that will be reviewing plans as permits are submitted for new homes or commercial projects or subdivisions. And then the water resources, One Water study there for $315,000 is also requested. So our proposed budget for the general fund, we have departmental revenues of about $950,000. And these are generally permit-related revenues or reimbursement from other departments for services that our teams provide internally. So that generates that revenue. Our expenditure budget is roughly $8.2 million for the general fund. And as you can see, a significant portion of that, about $3.5 million, is personnel expenses. And the remaining difference is O&M expense of about $4.7 million. The net income on this is really what the property tax portion or general fund support is of this function. So where our other revenues as a resident of Boise, we're paying those property tax or sales tax and whatnot. Those are supporting the services that we provide here as well. So that concludes the overall presentation. So next would be requesting the motion from commission. I have a proposed motion or several motions. If there are questions, we can consider those maybe before, and then we can move to the motion.
All right, thank you for that quick overview and reminder and some updates. I will turn it over to the commission and our peers on council for any questions. It looks like Commissioner Crowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Heather, thank you again for your work and your presentation. Had no problem with the water renewal rate plan. I'm pleased to see the residential increase is somewhat less than the overall. On the solid waste rate plan, you mentioned a 3% increase. Is that universal for all customer classes?
Chair, Commissioner Crowley, right now we're anticipating that to be universal for all rate classes. We are doing a little bit further analysis to confirm that, but at this point we are assuming that that would be for each class, yes.
Just as a follow-up, Heather, is that the 3% just for 1 year, or are you? I didn't see anything specifically referenced for multiple years subsequent to fiscal year 23. Is it the 3%? Is that it for the next 2 or 3 years?
Chair and Commissioner Crowley, the 3% is for fiscal 2023, and then as we let me go back to that slide. Sorry for the flipping through slides. So if we look at the cash flow projection going forward, when we dip down slightly, then there would be a slight rate increase to bring it back up a little bit more. But the fund would need slight rate increases over time to keep up with inflation, or we don't yet know maybe what would be an increase from either Republic Services or the landfill. So those rate increases in the future, we're not making an assumption of those changes. We will incorporate those as they happen and then factor in any future rate increases as needed. So what would be reflected right now would just be a rate increase to keep up with inflation, but minor ones are included.
Thank you. Those are the only questions I had.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments on this presentation? All right, hearing none, if we could get back to the slide with the proposed motion language.
Yeah.
Then I would entertain a motion on any or all of the items listed here.
And Mr. or Chair, maybe I can define what the motions are so that we can walk through them really quickly. So the first motion would be requesting approval of the water renewal cost of service analysis and that 3-year phase in that we talked about last meeting. The next motion would be requesting approval of each of the different funds as we presented the budgets for each of those different funds. And then the next two motions would be requesting the rate increases for solid waste fund and water renewal fund. And so the one for the solid waste fund kind of goes back to that question that Commission Member Crowley asked about the 3% increase. Right now, we are anticipating that will be a 3% for each class of customer. We will do a little bit further analysis to see if we need to specify a slight difference between customer classes, but we're anticipating it will be 3% for each. So, okay.
Awesome. Thanks for the quick explainer. And just to clarify, these are each meant to be separate motions, or can we make a single motion for approval of the 4 segments and forwarding the recommendations on if the commission wishes?
Chair, I believe if the commission's comfortable with doing all of them at once, that's perfectly fine. I think it's to your pleasure.
Perfect. All right. Well, I will turn it over to the commission for any comments, further questions, and a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Crowley.
if there are no additional questions, I would like to make a motion
Please.
for approval of the water renewal cost of service analysis, including a 3-year phase-in period to reflect the cost to serve individual customer classes. The approval of the general geothermal solid waste, municipal irrigation and water renewal budgets as presented. Approval of an overall 3% rate increase for total rate revenues for solid waste fund. Increases by specific lines of business as proposed. And also approval of the rates by customer class as presented for the water renewal fund.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second for the motion?
I second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, the same sign? Hearing none, the motion carries. And then do we need a separate motion to pass these recommendations on? All right. So now on the table, we need a motion to pass on the recommendations made in the previous motion.
Right. Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Crowley.
given the commission's approval of the prior motion, I would move that the commission ask the staff to forward these recommendations on to the mayor and city council for inclusion and approval in the city's overall fiscal year 23 budget.
All right, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed, the same sign? Hearing none, the motion carries. Thank you for all the work that you've put in getting us up to speed over the past couple months.
Thank you,
Really
Chair.
impressive work.
And thank you, commissioners. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Heather.
All right, and that, I believe, brings us to the last regular item on our agenda, the discussion around the Public Works Commission subcommittees. And I will join Director Burgos in introducing this topic a little further and leading a discussion around some of what we've already generally introduced.
Chair Gravatt, thank you very much. Wanted just to spend a little time talking about some of the concepts that the chair and I discussed over the last several months. So as we presented last commission meeting, we talked about starting with two specific subcommittees to be part of the Public Works Commission. One is focused on water renewal services, the second on climate action. The water renewal services subcommittee, from a staff perspective, what we're looking for in that subcommittee is certainly more in-depth discussion on key policy issues. So for example, with the initiation of a recycled water program, we're at the very beginning of that conceptual program. There's going to be a lot of policy discussion that we need to have in the coming years. And some of those are going to be fairly meaty topics. It would be really helpful for staff to be able to meet with two commissioners at a time, the subcommittee, have those discussions, and then take that to the larger commission with those two subcommittee members being able to represent the discussions and be able to present some of that information back to their colleagues on the commission. In addition, specific to water renewal, we'd like to have the opportunity to have I'll describe it as a standing report out to the subcommittee, because there's just going to be a lot of information that we'll be gathering to ensure that projects are on budget, on schedule, that we're managing risks associated with some of the large expenditures that are coming. There'll be discussion on things like our bond issuances. And so that information, we'd like to start to develop kind of a ongoing report that we update on a regular basis, just to keep transparency into the programs and into the projects that'll be moving forward in the coming decade and beyond. So that would be for water renewal services. Then on the climate action side, that's going to be a large kind of catch-all for a lot of the work that's happening on the energy front, water front. Solid waste would be part of that subcommittee. And similarly, we'll have some standing information that we provided the subcommittee members, but then there's certainly going to be some policy discussion that we're going to need help with navigating things like renewable energy policy, solid waste, the strategic plan that we'll be developing for the solid waste program. So again, more policy level discussion. It's staff's thoughts moving forward that we would start with two commissioners as the subcommittee. Let's at least just start there. And then as we start to ramp up and we feel like we're ready to start including, if we want to start including members of the public at large, we could potentially do that. But our recommendation is to just start with two commissioners at first and kind of ramp up our process and kind of get a little bit of I guess a pattern going and getting information out. So, and I think that's what I wanted to highlight. So I'll turn it over to Chair Gravatt for his comments. And then I know you wanted to discuss with the commission, maybe who might be on which subcommittee.
Where to begin? So the two broad topics I want to be sort of useful in two fronts. Useful first to assisting staff in tackling some of these larger projects. And so one part of our discussion, I would like to identify sort of our capacity to jump in and lend our expertise, our learning, and our additional effort into those efforts. And on the other hand, recognizing that we, as the initial members of the subcommittee, do come from a variety of backgrounds with different levels of expertise in different areas. What would our expectations and our requests be of staff in helping equip us to engage in these sort of deeper dive conversations, learning more some of the nitty gritty of these different topics? So with those two directions in mind, I would open up for just a high level initial discussion, any questions, any ideas that don't have to be well fleshed out that are coming to mind as we've introduced this topic over the past couple meetings.
Chair,
Commissioner Morgan.
this may not sound the greatest. I am very powering through it. I had cold. But I don't have any, as you said, fleshed out thoughts other than this is very exciting and welcome from my end. I feel like it's very refreshing and needed to be able to have us be able to present back to the commission through subcommittees more deeper level content and initiatives and thought. And so I'm very excited to engage in this.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate the enthusiasm despite the head cold. All right. Any other initial comments or questions? All right. Well, hearing none, then I would open up to the members of the commission who are here for your preliminary interest in participating in either of these subcommittees.
Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Morgan.
I would like to express interest in the Climate Action Committee. Subcommittee.
Awesome. Thank you. Any interest from our other? Yes, Commissioner Crowley.
Mr. Chair, I'd also like to express interest in participating with the Climate Action Committee or subcommittee.
Awesome. Thank you. And I will express my interest in either or both subcommittees. And I look forward to hearing from and learning from discussions, no matter what my role is in either. So I will put my name on the Water Renewal Subcommittee for preliminary discussion.
Chair Cravat,
Yes, Commissioner Ellis.
I too am interested in the climate action group, but I really don't want it to be too heavy in one area. So I'm flexible as well.
Sure.
I really like to dive into solid waste, but I don't know where that fits into things. But I also feel like I have a lot to learn in the water area. So it's like put me in coach wherever is necessary.
Awesome. And we can take just a little bit longer to consider as we iron out some of the more specific scope of work and identify a place to start before we make our official motions for creation of these subcommittees. And I will work to follow up with the commissioners who are not currently present to gauge their interest as well. And also recognize the capacity that we all have to contribute in a useful manner to any of these efforts. And we will also continue to learn and be engaged as members of this body. So even if we don't engage on that in those deeper dives, we will still have the opportunity to learn and provide input here. All right, any other questions, comments, concerns, or threats related to the subcommittee's discussion? Any other input or questions from staff of the commission moving forward as we continue to gauge out these ideas? I'll open it up broadly. All right. Well, hearing none, I'm really excited that we are just inches away from officially deep diving and hopefully providing some much needed input on some of the things that we don't regularly have time to explore in our regular meetings. So thank you all so much for your interest and for your enthusiasm. All right. With that, next up on our agenda are any updates from the director's reports? And I will turn it over to Director Burgos for any updates.
Chair Gravatt, thank you. So the reports were included in the packet, so I'll certainly stand for any questions you may have within the reports. I did want to note and include the commission. We have the Earth Day event coming up on the 23rd of April, and that's going to be our kind of remissioning, rededication of the Boise watershed to be focused on the Water and Climate Action Center. And as far as we know, it's going to be the first of its kind in the U.S. So we're really excited about that, and that official kind of remissioning is going to happen on the 23rd. So please, if the commissioners are so inclined, that's a Saturday, and it'll be from, I think it's 11 to 2 o'clock at the watershed. So please join us. And then I'll stand for any questions y'all may have on the director's reports.
Awesome. Yes, and I believe that Kathy did send out the official invitation via email fairly recently. Are there any questions about the director's reports? All right, hearing none. Before we wrap up, I would just remind everybody, we got another email from staff, request from the Office of Community Engagement for headshots. So if by this coming Monday, you could send a headshot in, they are revamping a web page on the City of Boise website to provide more access to information about the work that we do. And I look forward to seeing our smiling faces up there. All right, is there anything else to come before the commission today? All right, if there is not, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Crowley.
I would move to adjourn.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second it.
Motion and second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Those the same sign. Hearing none, the motion carries and we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.